Okay, so today you got exercise 226, and as I said before, we just move forward and move forward and move forward, and I keep showing you stuff because we're running out of days left for me to show you things. And so the further along we get, the more at least you guys will be exposed to something. It might not actually happen in reality because you're preparing for your final and you're trying to get your model ready, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Today, I'm going to talk about doing sectional renderings. So we've been doing renderings. We've got, theoretically, an interior day rendering, an interior night rendering, an exterior day rendering, and an exterior night rendering. You can choose to do a sectional rendering, which, by the way, is not required as part of the final, but I want to show you how to do it because in 220 you'll need to do it anyway, certainly in 221. So it's important for you to have the skill, but it's not required as part of the final. You can choose to do it night or day. It's completely up to you. Obviously, you'll want to start with the appropriate file. So if it's a day rendering, you start with one of your day renderings. If it's a night rendering, start with one of your night renderings because you'll already have the lights installed and that sort of thing as well. I believe I opened the wrong one, so I'm going to open the other one while I'm continuing to talk because we have to get... I'm going to attempt to do a day rendering. Oh, of course I don't have it, right? All right, well, we'll go back to this one. It doesn't have lights inside, but I'll have to deal with it as we go forward. So today we're going to do the sectional rendering. Then we'll move into creating drawings from Rhino, which is a combination of renderings, but also doing exports to a program like Illustrator or AutoCAD, or depending on what's appropriate. And we'll cover the Make 2D. So as we go forward, today's exercise 226. As we go forward in the next several class periods, we're going away from renderings and into drawings because I want you to make sure that you have skills to be able to do the drawings. While you're working on your exercises, as I've said before, work on whatever is appropriate for where you are relating to your final project, and then turn in something that says you were here and says that you worked. Does that make sense? So at the end of exercise 226 today, maybe you don't have a section, but you have a really good exterior daytime rendering, post that. Okay? Remember that you are supposed to be making comments now because now's when you should be getting feedback from each other, trying to make your renderings better, what looks good, what doesn't, etc. Okay? So I have the daytime render here, which is what I'll start with as the sectional render to have a look. And sectional renderings, we will cover a sectional rendering drawing, so everything that I say will be repeated at least once. But being able to cut a section of a 3D model is really important from an architectural standpoint in terms of your final presentation boards for, say, 220 or 221. A lot of times you'll need to do a section. The better looking your section is, the more people will engage with your project, the more the reviewers will love it. So this is kind of one of the more critical things that you can learn to do rather quickly in Rhino. So we're going to start first by kind of explaining what Rhino has built into it to deal with sections, and then we'll start to kind of tweak it for the rendering purposes. And so the first thing that I want to introduce you to is actually a plugin that's been installed on all of these computers. It's free. It's from Rhino itself. It's by the same people. It's a plugin called Section Tools. And if you have Rhino at your home computer, I would highly recommend installing the Section Tools plugin. My guess is that come Rhino version 6, Section Tools will just be built right into Rhino itself, as opposed to being a plugin. So it's available here under the Section Tools menu. There is also a toolbar which doesn't look like it's installed that sometimes will float in here as one of these little ribbons. For most of what we need, we can go through straight from the Section Tools menu, or we can use the key commands to do it in the first place. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with a plane that identifies what I want to try to section. And so in this example here, I'm going to try to slice through the staircase that's in the middle of this model right there, and I'll try to have it looking in this general direction. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll create just a very large rectangular plane. So I'm going to zoom way out, and I'll create a very large rectangular plane. I want it to be a vertical plane. so that it's just much, much bigger than my whole model. If I look at this in the side view, right, I want to make sure that this plane intersects the entire geometry of this scene. So there it is, intersecting everything. We can see it in the perspective view. Nothing particularly fancy about it. It's just a regular plane. But this is going to help me position where I want this and how it's going to slice through my model. So I have it selected here. We see that it's nowhere close to my model. So I'm going to go ahead and in the right view, I'm going to move this so that it intersects my model. And I'll get in a little bit closer and I'll fine tune this so that it slices through the model right there. And if we look at the perspective view here and we zoom in on it, we can get a sense for that plane being there. I'm going to go ahead and create a separate layer, and we're going to call this section 00. Oops. And I'm going to change the plane to be on a sub-object. So this is S00 plane. And I'll change the object to be on that layer. And that's just so that I have the flexibility to turn it on and turn it off. Okay? So now that I have that, I'm going to use the section tools command, and I'm going to create a section. So I'll go to section tools, create, or type stcreate, and it's going to say select objects to section. I want to section all the objects, so I'll type all. I'll press enter when done. There we go. Now I have some options. Okay, I need to know which direction I want this to be. The section does happen to be along the x-axis, so I'm okay with it being on the x-axis. Right? The name is fine. The start index is fine. Load from file. This would be if you had a bunch of coordinate systems where you were cutting a bunch of sections at once. By object is fine. Now we get to something called solid mode. I'm going to change this to surfaces, which hopefully will fill in any surface that I have with or anything that I cut through with a solid surface. Hopefully. Okay? It doesn't always work perfectly. Okay, so that's set to surfaces. Label show all, that's fine. Arrow scale if 1 is fine. I'll go ahead and press enter to accept, and you'll see that I get kind of a very large bar with 2 arrows on either end. Okay? Right now it's going the opposite direction that I want, so I'm going to click on flip so that it's going that way. Okay? And I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to snap to the middle of the top of my plane that I just created. All right? And that's it. So I've clicked. I have my little section, and I'll go ahead and hit enter to be done. Okay? Let me turn off my plane. Should have. All right. Because I shouldn't have included this plane in my section, so it created it again. Go ahead and get rid of it. Okay, so let me go down here, and I'm going to look more carefully at my model. So it created a layer called ST00 for section tool 00. That's the section, and that's all the objects that it filled in. Okay, and we'll look at that in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for right now. And I'm going to go back up to the section tools menu, and I'm going to go to section tools and then view, or ST view sections is the command. Okay, I'm going to pick from the list my ST00, and I'll say OK. And then it's going to say select viewport to enable, right? And I'm going to type in render 02. Okay, so that I'm typing in whatever my current viewport is, render 02. I'll hit enter, and when I do that, it then slices right through my model so that I get a good section view of what the model looks like. Yeah. I will definitely repeat it. Okay, let me finish one thing first. Right? Under ST00, I can turn on, right, what I sliced through, and the hope is that it would show up. But like I said, it's not perfect, and it didn't, in fact, create what I wanted it to create. Okay, so let me go back through and do this again. I'm going to go ahead and ST clear all views. Oops. And then let me go ahead and delete the section here. All right, so once again, I have the plane where I wanted it to cut through. Okay, I'm going to go up to Section Tools and go to Create. Okay, select Objects to Section. I'm going to say All, but I don't want it to section that big plane. I made a mistake last time and included that. Okay, so it should be everything else, and it looks like I actually have a bunch of layers that are locked, which could be problematic. So let me go ahead and unlock all of those. And let's try again. All except for that. Good. Go ahead and press Enter when I'm done. Then I go through these options. The direction is the x-axis again. The only thing that really matters is that solid mode should be set to surfaces, which it is. So I'll go ahead and hit Enter, which now gives me this line. And I want to make sure that my arrows on the line are pointing in the direction that I want the section to be done, which they are. So I'll go ahead and click on the center of this object. And this one is ST01 because it's the second section I created. And I'll go ahead and hit Enter. Okay, so I get ST01. It shows up here as a locked layer. That's perfect. I'm going to turn off my ST00 plane. And then I'm going to go up to the Section Tools and go to View. And I'll pick from a list ST01. Go ahead and say OK. And I want it to clip, so all these options are fine. But I have to select the viewport, so I'll type render 02. And it will then slice through my model right at that point. Right? And as I said, it's supposed to create the solid objects. It did create the lines for me, and a few of the pieces ended up being solid, but not all of them. So, like I said, it's a little bit iffy, and we'll have to go through and correct that afterward. But very quickly, I was able to create a nice section of this model. Okay? Which is good, certainly from a design standpoint, but it's also good sometimes when you're working on a model, you want to slice off part of it and be able to work on the inside, because this works just like any normal model, and I can turn it back on by going to Section Tools, Clear All Views, Clear All from All Views, or ST Clear will clear it. Okay? So this is great, except that V-Ray doesn't recognize this as a section. So if I were to render it in V-Ray, I'd get the whole building again. So it's not recognizable in V-Ray. So at this point, everything that I've done to this model is completely reversible, doesn't hurt to do it. But from this point on, the things that I'm going to start to do become irreversible. Right? I'm going to permanently damage the model. So I want to make sure at this point that I do a Save As so that I don't accidentally screw up my file. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. And I'll go to today's exercise here. It should be 226. Oh, I have a folder called 226. And let me create a new folder for fall 2015. There. And I'm going to call this section 01. And I'll go ahead and click Save. And again, this is important that I do this because I'm going to start really destroying parts of my model. Okay, so I'm going to go back to ST Clear All Views so that I have the rest of my model put together again. And I am going to flip back and forth. I'll turn that back on and turn it off again. And I'm going to turn on that giant plane so that that's shown again. And now I have to go through and explode all the blocks that have been put into the scene. So notice that the Section Tools splits right through a block without a problem. Right? It creates the section through the block. If I'm going to do what I'm going to do now, I do in fact have to bring the block fully into the scene and start to work with it. So I'm going to take the block and I'm going to type explode, which then drops the entire block into the scene such that I can pick any one of the individual surfaces again. Okay? Likewise, for the ground here, I'm going to go ahead and explode that and bring that in. Now I wasn't able to explode it. The water is a block instance, so I'll explode that like that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn off make this the active layer. I'm going to turn off the bunch grass outside because I really don't need it. It's just going to slow things down. Okay, so that's turned off. My blocks are exploded. I think I have some other blocks that are the windows here. So I'm going to have to select those and explode those. So I'm going to just select all and type explode and see if it got all of my Windows, yeah. Looks like all of my windows are now exploded, so we're in good shape. Okay, so now that I have that done, what I need to do for V-Ray, and there's kind of two different ways. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to split off the half of the building that I don't want anymore. Okay, and once I split that half of the building off, I can just turn it off and render it, or I can do something a little fancier in the process. So what I'll do is I'll type split, select objects to split. It's going to be all except for that big plane. So I hold down Control and deselect the plane. Right? I'll go ahead and press Enter. Select cutting objects. There's that big plane. And I'll go ahead and I'll hit Enter. And so this process takes a while, and what it's going through is it's trying to split every single one of those surfaces right along that section line. And it should work for almost everything. If you have a piece of furniture that you brought in or something that's a mesh object, not a regular NURBS Rhino object, you may have to do split mesh instead of just split, which would split the mesh. So we'll give this a second to finish. All right, so it finished its split. And so now if I look at this in, say, the right view, we'll see that I can select one half of the building or the other half of the building, and they're entirely independent of each other. See how that works? Okay, so that's a good thing. So I could do something as simple. Let me turn off the section plane here. I could do something as simple. Let me switch views. I'm going to switch to the left view. Because it'll make selecting this a little bit easier. Okay, I could take this, select everything, and I could just type hide, and I could zoom in on my object, and at this point I can render it. Okay, in this section view. The problem here is that if I were to render it, this works kind of like SketchUp does, where this whole side of the building is open, and all the light and all the sun and everything wouldn't follow through, and I wouldn't get little patches of sun where it's casting through windows, etc. It would just be wide open. And we're using way too sophisticated of a program to just default into that view. So we're going to take that back, and I'm going to go to Show. And instead of doing it that way, I'm going to use a very special material that I've worked to develop that's on the course website. It's called a see-through material. It's also included in your package. And what this is it's a material that couldn't actually exist in real life. It is a material that's opaque to sunlight, but completely transparent to visual transmission. Okay, so it doesn't work, but it's V-Ray's way of faking it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this side of my object, right? That side of the split, all the objects, and I'm going to make sure that I turn off any of the glass. So anything that I have glass on, I'm going to turn off. So we'll turn off window glass here. And you have to bear with me a little bit while I work through and make sure I get them all. All right, so I have all of those turned off, and I did that on purpose, right? Because the glass, obviously, I want to allow light through where the windows are. So the glass is turned off, and now I'm going to load up the see-through material. And so I don't have it here yet, so I'm going to right-click on See Materials, go to Load Material, and on my flash drive, in my Resources folder, in my V-Ray folder, into my Materials, And under Special Materials, you'll see something called See-Through. And so I'll go ahead and load up that See-Through Vismat. And it'll show up right there. If I were to preview it, lo and behold, there's nothing shown. I'm going to right-click on See-Through and say Apply Material to Selection, which means that it's being applied to everything that I currently have selected, which is essentially that half of the building. Okay? Now we'll go back through, and I need to select those glass pieces that I turned off, and I can either leave them completely off, or I can assign them a completely transparent material that's both transparent to light and transparent to visual. For right now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave them off because it's not really going to change the rendering much at all. Okay? So all of that now has a see-through material applied to it. And so now I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to ST View, and I'm going to turn back on my section view. And it's going to be in the Render 02 view. And I'm going to look carefully at this piece. Okay? So it looks like when I look at this that there are still some holes that need to be filled in. So I'm going to do some modifications. Let me zoom selected on that so I can zoom out. And I'm going to work on the ST01 layer. And I'm going to fill in the things that didn't get filled in before. Right? And there's actually an error right there in how the wall comes together, but such is life. So I'm going to go ahead and work with a rectangle, and I'm going to start filling in. Oh, come on. Vertical plane here. So nothing too exciting. It's just a matter of filling in these holes. Oops. All right, we'll do it from down here. It's just doing a terrible job of snapping for me right now. All right, so I have those put in. It did fill in some. You can see the stairs all got filled in, so I didn't have to worry about those. It's probably because I had a few holes in how my walls were constructed, a few errors. Okay, so those are now put in. I'd like to do a little bit more so that I have some ground below. So I'm going to take this curve and I'm going to do an offset of that curve. We'll do a distance of, say, 100 feet. And let me do it in the side view here. That, and we'll repeat it with this one, like that, and then we can loft this to this, and that to that. So I'm just filling in the ground there, right? I really should probably have traced it first. Let me just trace it. to make my life easier, I traced it, and then I'll join these together. And then let's get rid of these. And I'll offset this piece. And then we can loft that and that together. And all that does is essentially fill in everything that's below the ground, right, making it solid. So then I need a material to apply to the section, right, so the stuff I'm cutting through. And this could be black, it could be white, it depends on what feels right for your particular rendering. I'll do it as black and we'll see how it turns out. So let me go ahead and just load up. I'm going to create a material, it's standard, and I'm going to change the color to be black. And it's right there. We can preview it. It looks black. That's good. And we'll call this section. Okay, and I'm going to apply the section material to this whole layer. It's called section. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And so now that's been applied to the whole thing. So at this point, it's a matter of setting up the view, right, for my final rendering. And so I can do a sectional perspective view, right, where I'm doing something like this, where it's cut through. I could do an elevation view if I'd rather. So I could switch into one of my elevations. So in this case, my front view, like that. And I could do the rendering in this view. Right? It really doesn't matter. It's a matter of what feels right to you. All the rest of the settings for the daytime, etc., should be fine. So at that point, right, I'm going to go ahead and do the rendering here. We'll get this into a position that we're happy with, something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and render. Now I want to check a few options before just to make sure. I want to make sure that when I plugged in my flash drive, my environment files, my mapping files came through correctly. If I click preview, I shouldn't get a gray square, so something got lost. So this is the Malibu overlook file. Let me go back here and resources V-Ray. Malibu overlook. This is the environment part of it. If I preview it now, I should get that. That's good. And I'll make sure that loads. That's good. So I made sure that those two worked out okay. It would also be a good idea if I went back through my materials and made sure that they all loaded correctly. So like my concrete loaded and looked like that. If I preview it and it turns out all gray, that's a problem. It looks like it ended up okay. So I'm not going to have to go through. I would personally go through and make sure that they all did turn out the way I wanted them to. Okay, so that's established. I'll go to output. We'll do a small one first as a test. So I'm going to click on Get View Aspect so it matches my exact view here, and then we'll do it at 300. And under System here, I'm going to turn off Distributed Rendering for this preview, and then we'll go ahead and do a render. Before I click that render button, I am going to click Save, just in case. Right. So as soon as that's done, we'll give it a render, and we'll see how it looks. So we'll zoom in a little bit. So that's a reasonable approximation. I'll do a higher quality render in just a second. We're getting the slice through, but notice that we're also getting the way the light comes through the windows into the space on the inside, not just a wide open space. And that's the purpose of spending this extra effort. Okay? So yes, the background is less than ideal in terms of what the hillside looks like. Great opportunity for some Photoshop work to fix that up. But you can see how quick the section was to get. That's a pretty high quality section. So let me go ahead and I'm going to render this out as a higher quality, and we can look at it after that's done. But I like to do that test before. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the distributed rendering. And I'm going to resolve the servers. I already have a bunch of them loaded, so that's fine. We'll go ahead and say OK. And then let's bump up the size here to be a little bit larger. and then I am going to do an autosave of my output. So this is 226, and I'm going to say this is a section 01. And I'm going to update the date here to 11. What's today? The 7th. What's the date? 18th. 11/18/2015. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. That way it auto-saves for me in this larger format. Okay? So I have that set. I have my size set. And now I'll go ahead and render. Which obviously this is going to take longer, so I'll turn you loose to work, and then we'll come back and talk about it once the end result is there. Okay, so I said I'd tell you when it was done. It just finished, so an hour and plus for this resolution, but that's reasonable for this kind of a resolution. And we can see that as I zoom in, I have a lot more that I can see. I think the important things to point out in this, maybe it would look better if this was a white. It's just a little heavy because of the blackness of it. Certainly you guys can't see the details on the screen as well as I can in here. They're actually not quite that dark. But I think once you get to this stage of the rendering, you realize that you really need more lights in the back of the rooms and that sort of thing. If I were to put those lights in, I think it would make a big difference in kind of the overall scene here. The background up in here with the hillside and whatever really needs a little bit more care. Probably best done in Photoshop to get that nice grass texture. I will show you at the end of the semester. We'll spend a day and I'll show you some techniques to do that. But relatively simply with a little bit of Photoshop work, you can get awfully good results out of that, such that you have a nice sectional perspective. If you were not interested in having the sectional perspective, I'm going to save this right now before I forget to do it and close it. Good. If you were not interested in the sectional perspective and instead wanted more of an axonometric, remember we can switch the properties here from being in perspective to parallel, which is going to switch it into more of the traditional axon look. And you could do it as the 30-60 or the 30-30, depending on where you wanted it. You could also do it as an approximation of a more of a 45 or a 30-30, something like that, depending on what view you wanted of it. Right? It just depends on kind of the look of what the overall piece is that you're going for and how you want that to look. Remember also that we can render it as a flat view. So if I switched into a view like this, right, we can essentially render it out as a true sectional view in color as a render. We're going to do this setup as an export or as a render, and then also as an export down the road with a line drawing, so you can see how it might overlay with a line drawing and create that kind of a look for this particular piece. I'm not going to do that today because I want you to keep working and concentrate on where you're going. But I at least wanted to point out that you have the option to change what this view is and what it would look like. Are there any questions about the section part? No? All right.